So one topic that some of you have voiced concern about before has to do with layoffs in the industry. One thing we've seen at some larger studios has been the tendency to lay people off after a project is completed, i.e. they no longer need those people and let them go. This is a little different. This is a smaller developer, Robot Entertainment. For EA to lay off 30 people wouldn't exactly be news. They have significantly more than that. For Robot Entertainment, that is a significant chunk of their staff. So they're actually in the middle of working on projects, and suddenly you're finding there to be a economic reason why they can't afford that many other team members. I don't know why. I've heard a few rumors about it. Not sure what is exactly the case. But we looked at that document last week. They showed you exactly how to project your corporate finances. So they looked at the revenue coming in and how you would be spending that money each month, rent, salaries, et cetera, et cetera. And the important thing is you have to project that down the line. So you're hoping that this isn't a case where right now they need to lay these people off or else they can't pay anybody. You hope that they're taking a look down the line and saying that by laying off these 30 people, we're able to complete these 2 games accordingly. The fear is they suddenly hit a wall and suddenly had to let folks go and are now scrambling for resources. You hope it's the former where they're projecting down the line rather than the latter. So this is one of those things we'll be following and seeing how they do. Orcs Must Die was a lot of fun. So certainly hope that they can keep going accordingly. All right. On a happier note, one thing we're seeing more and more often is governments and civic groups and so on seeing the value of the games industry. So the City of London itself is committing $1.7 million to a group I had heard of and didn't know had that many resources. Games in London. This is something I'd love to see in Atlanta or even San Francisco. Just a city organization focused on building up the game industry. So the CGDD, the group I run, does it as a private association. This is part of the actual United Kingdom Economic Development Authority, which are groups we're seeing more and more interested in these. Those groups will support like manufacturing, logistics, building harbors, and so on. And it's good to see them focusing on games. And it's very interesting to see in the article, they talk about the United Kingdom being the 5th largest customer for games. I assume they mean by the amount of money spent. So United States, Japan, Germany, perhaps Russia, perhaps China, South Korea, not sure. Well, yeah, we'll say that many games, unfortunately too many games are pirated in a lot of these different places. So I'm not sure what they would compare themselves to, but what we know is that England is also somewhere, the United Kingdom is somewhere around the 5th largest location for game development. They've got obviously Rockstar in Scotland doing great work, a lot of good companies in London itself and so on. So you've got Canada, the United States, Japan, obviously China does a great deal of development. United Kingdom is certainly up there, but it's nice to see the city give that much money to it. Atlanta is starting to do something like that. They have a loan arrangement made up for folks in creative and entertainment industries in order to create new jobs, get new innovation moving. And that's part of what the UK is doing. And it's definitely a different look at the industry when here we see people saying games make people kill each other, and instead look at what they're doing in the United Kingdom where the government is directly helping drive the creation of a games industry. They see the value of one thing we know is that the desire to make games drives many, many people to study technology. And in addition, a good games industry is a cornerstone of a good tech industry. They just go hand in hand, be it in San Francisco, be it in Austin, and so forth. Again, for the reason that it attracts people to it, and also because it drives so much innovation. I appreciate you opening the door for folks coming in late. Generally, I'll be glad to let them wait out there till I come to a break point, but that's very nice of you. So you all owe him for not having you stand out there till I finally get a break point 15 minutes from now. So a few things about the Game Developers Conference that just passed. This is the big event. It's been going on since the 80s. I started attending it back in 92 when it was still the Computer Game Developers Conference. Definitely looked at a huge number of attendees, 28,000 people in attendance this year. People who are currently working in game development, wanting to get into game development, folks who are making money off of the games industry, and so forth. Something very interesting this year is that there are a lot more activities that were peripheral to GDC as opposed to just being part of GDC. Has sessions you can attend and a big expo hall you can go to and parties. In addition, companies like Unreal and Unity set up their own events going at the same time that you could attend in parallel with GDC in order to learn about those tools. There are also places where people make deals, make games where studios can meet with publishers and so on. So this here is one of the things I found most interesting, the third-party publishers offering demo space to people showing off their games, indie titles, and also the whole Unity event was one of the things I hear the most interest in. Unity was just running session after session how to make their games. So we're actually going to be doing a GDC wrap-up report with Georgia Game Developers Association members who went. That'll be tomorrow night on our live streaming channels. I put that up in the announcements for the class if you are interested. But the other thing I want to show you that I'd recommend following is this Twitter handle. How many of you do have a Twitter account? You don't need a Twitter account to follow this, but it helps. This is not GDC, which I've been very amused by, which has had a lot of good information. Done by people who both attended and did not attend GDC. Folks have been using the not GDC hashtag as a place to comment on game development, post their own thoughts on game development, and as they say in the introduction, talk about everything related. Ever wanted to wax lyrical on video game toilets, dynamic procedural generation, or branching narrative? Post it there. So it's been an interesting look at all sorts of things. People are interested in the game design community. So let's see what these are the most recent ones. So I have no idea what's showing up. If it ends up being prawn, I absolutely apologize for it. No control over that point. But so far, this has been a lot of good stuff. Another not GDC talk. Oh, this was a big issue. A lot of international visitors were denied visas to GDC this year, including about a half dozen speakers, which is extremely annoying that the government is stopping folks who are leaders in technology from coming to talk and share their knowledge. So that was a very interesting aspect of it. This is another good writer, generally worth following. What did he post up on Gamma Sutra? His blog is always a good one to follow. How to beat procrastination. Good one to look at while you're on spring break, or probably right when you get back. Maybe we'll make that one of our readings for right when you're back from spring break. But in any case, lots of interesting things in here. A post-mortem on the game Dead Girls in Space, which I'm not familiar with at all. Folks talking about GDC presentations and so on. What I found a lot of fun about the not GDC hashtag is it really is people talking about what's currently of interest to game developers, like game developers not able to get visas to come to America, that sort of thing. So I always look at Gamma Sutra as a good place for that, but it's kind of curated. It's about a week behind. In this case, it's what people are thinking about right now in the game industry, and it's been a lot of fun. So I actually hope it'll continue to trend as a hashtag and one you can come back to. Yeah. So you see something about visas, you see something about how to think about data, you see UV tricks for cyclical shapes and bends, which is a pain if you're an artist, let me tell you. But Tiny Trees Post-Mortem, how math helped design a game. That looks like fun. Improving your team's productivity by being a lazy programmer. One I think a few people I know will take advantage of. But in any case, this is a hashtag to mark. You don't have to be on Twitter to read these. You can just look up the hashtag not GDC and enjoy it. But well worth following along. All right. So now that we've had a quick look at industry issues, let's go ahead and I did have one more thing I wanted to talk about very briefly. So as you know, I've been running a Kickstarter for the Noble Armada game that I'm currently working on. We ended that this morning. We were about 200% funded, which is pretty exciting for us. But we've talked briefly about metrics in games. What do you track? What are you interested in knowing about your gamers? And Kickstarter offers some very weak metrics for people like myself who run the campaign. But I was going to share them because they're kind of the default information game developers often want to know, especially developers who work on web-based games, mobile games, etc. So let's see if I can pull off the show showing anything horrible. All right. So here was the campaign. We were 199% funded, 177 backers. Kind of shows the very traditional Kickstarter curve where a lot of people jump on board in the beginning. It slows down a little bit in the middle. It jumps again when you hit your goal. That's always a period of excitement. And then it becomes this long, slow slog. And then right at the end, it'll jump again. So very, very traditional Kickstarter curve going on here. Shows where the money came from. And this is one of the basic things that if you're doing web games and so on, you want to know. Where are the people interested in your game coming from? And the one thing I do somewhat like about Kickstarter, all the different ways they track people coming in. So say you have a game up on Congregate. You want to know, how are people coming to your game in Congregate? Are they going to Congregate searching for great robot game and therefore finding your robot game? Are they typing in from some other site? Are they coming from your web page? How are they actually getting there? So in this case, what we see is the majority of the people coming to this campaign were coming off of Facebook. So I've got a lot of groups I promote. I've got a large fan community already active on Facebook. So that's where most of the people and most of the money came from. The interesting thing is the Kickstarter search. That means someone went to Kickstarter and then typed up Noble Armada Lost Worlds or something along that line and then pledged accordingly, which means they'd heard about it, went to Kickstarter, and then found it there. So this is one thing I don't like. I don't know how they got to Kickstarter first of all. And that's something I want to know. Clearly, they already knew about the game. So this is one of those things you want to track as a game developer. If someone comes to a site and types something in, how do they learn about you beforehand? Direct traffic, no refer information. That's really annoying that they have that, and a full 27 came from that. Then you see my own website. Then you see their advanced discovery tools, which is something I prefer. When people are doing this sort of show me games on video games sorted by newest, most funded, most backed, end date, whatever, and then you'll get something. So apparently, this is how Kickstarter helped the most. Whoops, that's the wrong place. A number of people obviously came that way. Then you see these other areas, which is nice. Kickstarter automatically sends out a 48-hour reminder email to people who are following it. And the number jumped on it that way. People came from a website called GameSkinny, which is a local game news portal. From Kickstarter emails that we sent out because they had starred my profile. They were coming from Reddit. They were coming from just Discover Video Games on the Kickstarter site. Their home recommended it. LinkedIn, etc. So if you are, whoops, where did the rest of this? There they go. Outlook. Number came from Outlook, etc. So it's really good to be able to track all these different portals into whatever you're doing. Second thing that I like about this is it's something you'd be interested in your game. If people are going to some screen, you want to know where they're coming to get to that screen. So think about all the different options. So the reason I wanted to show you this, it really does cover a lot of different options. Not to the level of detail I would like, but it at least gives you more information than I would get if it was just, say, Facebook, Kickstarter, or my homepage was all they offered, and other. So keep that in mind when you are doing your own metrics. This is an important one for a lot of people. Apparently, the number of people actually completed the watching my Kickstarter video was high. Usually, apparently, it's only about 10%. So I don't know if this number was particularly good. Yes?
Why would people pledge to something if you didn't watch the video, why would you pledge to it?
See, I find that interesting too. The question being, Why would anyone pledge to something where they hadn't at least looked at the video? This is the very first thing up on the Kickstarter. It's a surprising number of people do not, and I would have liked to have seen some sort of traffic or some sort of metric for that. But I expect that a lot of people already know about my game, might have looked at the video somewhere else. Obviously, it's on YouTube, it's on our website, and not looked at it on Kickstarter, or they very well knew that there's something they're going to back, whatever the video said. I'm in the video, so I can understand turning it off very quickly. But thankfully, a lot of people did watch it and go on. But you're right. The question that's outstanding, and a lot of people want to know, is why do people pledge? The video is often seen as the number one thing you can point to and say, it was a good video, therefore I want to do more, I wanted to learn more, it led me to look at more, it led me directly to pledge. But we know a lot of folks don't look at it at all, and many don't complete it. So then what is it that drives them to support a Kickstarter? And that really is for some companies, the $500,000 question. I'm not even sure what Iron Harvest is doing right now, but I think they're over 500,000 last I looked, yes. Right, they watched it the entire way through, 100%. Got to almost the end and turned it off.
Yeah, for me, when I'm watching videos normally, I'll get all the way until like the last 5 seconds and I'll turn it off.
Oh, you're that person.
Yeah, it's like I wish you could, or like.
That's true. I would love to see that tracked as well. How many people watched it? How many people? Big part for game designer. When do people turn it off? Did they turn it off at the 10-minute mark? Did they turn it off as soon as I started speaking? They turn it off 5 seconds away from the end? Where did they drop out? So no, that's a great point on metrics. All right. So that's what I wanted to show you regarding Kickstarter. And of course, as we mentioned before, the reason we were kickstarting this was that we'd come up with a lot of ideas that we wanted to fund beyond what we initially had funding for. And that leads us to Chapter 14. So I guess let's go ahead and talk about the quiz first. All right. What to do when you land on free parking while playing Monopoly is known as a house rule, optional rule, etc. The other options were mechanic tweak, bonus player, mechanic enhancement. Which of the following is a reason to cut mechanics? A, to have a rating change. B, to get the game to market in a certain time frame. C, as a result of playtesting, a certain mechanic doesn't work. Or D, all of the above. Who is familiar with the hot coffee mod for games they have for Grand Theft Auto? Yeah, exactly. One of the things they cut, it wasn't that fun. They needed to test it more, and they needed to make sure they passed their rating. Unfortunately, they left it in. And amazingly, hackers like to hack into games. Who would have thought it? Grand Theft Auto got in trouble for having an essentially pornographic mod within itself that they had commented out. Well, they've done more than just comment out. But they thought they'd hidden, but had not taken out the content. So when people when people broke into the executable and started playing around with it, they realized there was more content there than they had told them about. And there's a certain argument as to whether they meant to hide it or not. But
I mean, they did make an achievement.
So. It was not Rockstar's shining hour. It brought a lot of heat to the game industry. It wasn't a particularly good part of the game in any case. You can understand them taking it out because it just wasn't that fun. But in any case, if you have to cut content for the rating change, the reason I'm bringing this up is you remove it from the game. You don't just comment it out. And generally that's good for a lot of things. Don't just hide it, take it out if you're not going to make it work right. In a design document, detailed level design would be more appropriate for internal audiences than external. True or false? Absolutely. It is okay to use profanity in an external design document as long as it represents your publishing house. True or false? Limits the places you can have it posted, read, etc.
So the D&D mod.
Right. Right. That was very much an internal document that went external. And it didn't go external immediately. It took a few years before they went ahead and said, sure, y'all can read it. Yes, the D&D one was definitely external. Remember, it gave away So, again, I'm glad to let them sit till I get to a break point. No, go ahead, if you don't mind. Yeah, and you're welcome to come and go from this class. You're the one paying for it, not me. But not going to be the door service until we get to a break point. Right, so the Planescape Torment document obviously had a clear number of profanities in it. It also had clear spoilers. It was telling you what was going to happen for the end game. That was definitely an internal document. That was not meant for external dissemination until well after that game had launched. And probably at that point they didn't plan to show it off at all, but it is a good design document. So it was well worth sharing. Based on its content, the Play with Fire design document is most likely internal, external, either external or internal, or both internal and external. Both internal and external. There's nothing super secret being given away, but you could make the game off of that one. But by the same token, it's very clearly presenting information for the more general public. I think that Bateman did a very good job with that. It's a very rare document that I think works well both as an external and internal design document. Most are either too technical to go external or too vague to be used internal, and they're really pitched promotional documents. Bateman did a good job, and that design document was one of his best promotional tools. He was with a group called International Hobo when he started working on that game. They did not have much in the way of resources, as exemplified by the name International Hobos. But he put up the doc, started doing prototypes of the game. It got a lot of interest accordingly. And that design document ended up being one of his best promotional tools for that game. It's been through several iterations. I've seen several different versions of it. Yes?
Would you use more of use your external design document to get to producers?
Exactly. To an external producer who's going to be working with you, though they're probably going to want the internal one too. If they're paying you $100,000, $1 million for your game, they're going to want to see all your documentation, at least have it on file. On the other hand, marketing, just give them the external one. They don't need to know how you're doing cylinders. They don't need to know your memory mapping unless there's something particularly fascinating about it. And there's sometimes that you will give a part of your design document to press to give them a better understanding of what you're doing. And again, you don't want to necessarily have everything you're doing, certainly any secrets, leak out. You don't want to have spoilers about how the game ends leak out accordingly. Which of the following is not an experience players should get out of playing with fire? Effortless play, exploration of small environments, character development trees, or varied solutions? That's right, you should get effortless play, exploration of small environments, and varied solutions. After altering mechanics in any way, it is critical that the game be play tested again. True or false? 100% accuracy on that one. Absolutely. That is. I think we've talked about code freeze. When you get to the end of the game, make no changes. Just test, test, test. If something absolutely must be changed, change that. Change nothing else and test, test, test again until you've done that enough that you're sure there's nothing that you absolutely have to fix until the downloadable content comes out later. Brainstorming frequently results in this project management product that can adversely alter time or expensive development. A, feature creep. B, modified scope. C, risk analysis. Or D, dynamic adjustment. Feature creep, which is exactly what we got funded for Noble Armada. I mean, that is the odd thing about it, is we are specifically funding feature creep. But our advantage is that we had actually planned to ship now, and by doing the Kickstarter, so okay, we've got more money, can go a little longer and add these assets to it.
How much extra stuff did you get for the game?
A fair amount. We're adding another faction, the Inquisition, with their flame guns. We're adding a whole different type of mission, a lot of extended play. One of the big things we want to do was we started to think of it as a mobile experience, where you're never going to play for more than an hour, or a 15-minute play experience is best. But as we played it, we realized we really enjoyed sitting there playing with it for an hour or more. So we needed to have expanded playability that would let you do that. The missions as we had them set up were over. It was very hard to have an interesting mission that would last more than an hour. So one of the things we did was have a campaign editor now that can link all these missions. And I can sit there and play it for 4 or 5 hours and enjoy it accordingly. So that's exactly one of the things that it funded. And the whole idea, again, to put the tools in our users' hands so they can make the levels, the missions for the game. So that was the base of it, exactly.
Make the content for
Right. We always have a level editor that players can use. The trouble is it is not player friendly in any way. So that's what that was the base level of the Kickstarter, was to fund the player friendly one that they wouldn't have to sit there for a week figuring out before they made anything. Which thankfully we've had fans do on our old games. Our Emperor the Fading Suns game had some amazing maps and game versions made by fans who just went ahead and got into the code itself. We did not have easy to use tools for them. So I'm very impressed at what they turned out. All right, more often, great game ideas result in a perfectly working set of mechanics on the first try. True or false? False. Iterate, iterate, iterate has become the byword of the industry. And finally, which of these is not an avatar ability in Play with Fire? A, slam, B, dance, C, jump, D, burn.
Unfortunately,
It's dance. That's right. Dance Dance Flame Revolution was not the name of the game this time. All right. So that was the quiz. Let's go ahead and discuss risk, gold plating, additive, and subtractive design. So it is a truth in the game industry that if you are not going to ship on time or on budget, you don't just start firing people a la the Orcs Must Die developer, just having to lay off 30 people. I guess I'm at a break point. You don't just start laying folks off, etc. You don't just start laying folks off. You instead, what do? You cut features. Something that's very common for in new studios, even for larger ones, when they first start working on a game, is they do what's called gold plating. They say, all right, we could do the best AI in the world. We can come up with the best art for the game. We can put it on every platform out there. We can have the best marketing campaign. We have the best this. We can have the best that. But they don't necessarily have the best budget. So again, if you're Rockstar with a $100 million budget for your game, you can gold plate. You can make everything the absolute best there is. If you're a small studio working on, say, $25,000, you can't do that. You just cannot put those resources in to making everything the absolute best. So you need to focus. We're going to do this really well, we're going to do that really well, and everything else will be fun and acceptable. You see conversations about that within your readings about a core focus to your game. Making sure the core is fun, and then maybe adding above and beyond that. One thing I have seen designers do, and I sometimes worry about this, but I know it's worked for some, is they will go ahead and make their full wish list. We want to do this, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do that. With the full understanding, when they get to the end, some of these are first on the chopping block. Making incredible AI that is always learning, yeah, that's on the cutting block. If we don't have the time or money for it at the end, that goes away. And we're comfortable with that. That'd be an add-on for it. We're not going to make that core to our marketing. We're not going to make it core to the game. But if we get there, wonderful. That's the only time I've seen this level of gold plating work for a smaller studio. When they know that, hey, we could make it all gold if we had the time or money, but really we know we'll have to deal with some copper here and there and make a couple things gold. So when you are doing additive or subtractive design, and that's an interesting phrase for this, it's not a bad idea to overwish everything you can do. Just don't get tied to things too completely. You don't know which of them you might have to get rid of. The subtractive design, unfortunately, often happens unwillingly. And you'll have people really wanting to keep things that you're having to cut in order to ship the game. You were promising 100 levels. You're probably going to go out the door with 20 levels finished up because the others just aren't in good enough shape. But no, I put something really cool in this one level. Yeah, but that level as a whole stinks. So we're going to get rid of it and a bunch of others just like it. Subtracting mechanics, gameplay, etc. is often a last thought. So it's good to even have that planned out in the beginning. Brathwaite and Schreiber talk about optional rules. So now I want to apply this a little bit more to board game design. Because board games, you'll have a bit more of this as a back and forth, but it's very rare at the last minute to cut a whole part of a board game because you're running out of time and money. You might have to make the pieces cheaper, but you're not getting rid of mechanics. On the other hand, one thing that board games are great for are optional rules. And some games will ship with an entire page or multiple pages. Here's other ways to do it. And for more games, they will just develop. We talked about the Monopoly example in here, where free parking becomes a place where money goes, all sorts of rules apply. On the other hand, there's a line of thought, that the entire role-playing game industry only exists because Dungeons and Dragons really sucked when it came out. The argument's been that Dungeons and Dragons was essentially unplayable when it initially shipped as 3 little books. And so everybody who played it had to become game developers in order to actually make it a playable experience. And there was actually a term for that at the time called VARD, Variant D&D. And the thinking was pretty much everybody who played D&D other than Gary Gygax was playing a variant D&D system because D&D itself just wasn't playable. And all these magazines, fan magazines, came into existence at that time with all these new rule systems, all these new rule sets, some of which ended up in D&D in the future, and some of them turned into other role-playing games, Tunnels and Trolls, RuneQuest, etc., all blossomed out of this era. So that's always been a fascinating look at an entire industry coming out of additive design. D&D was really stripped down. Gygax knew it was in his head, didn't really get it across to folks on paper, and everybody else had to add to it. And a lot of people just wanted to add to it. You had all the folks who did recreationist combat and like the Society for Creative Anachronism, SCA and others, who actually liked to hit each other with swords and maces every weekend, with them saying the Dungeons and Dragons system just isn't realistic enough, and would come up with these crazy, complicated systems to say that they hit you on the left elbow or the right knee or hamstrung you, and others who thought the D&D combat system was too complex and wanted an even simpler one. Then you had Tunnels and Trolls and the like come out of those. So it's just fascinating to see that explosion. And we've seen this on board games. Monopoly is the classic example we've talked about. I've even seen what are called a homebrew system, something you came up with at home for games like Risk. And I'm willing to bet that a number of you actually started your own game design that way, coming up with rules for some existing game that you enjoyed playing. Who will admit to having done that? Yeah, fair number of you. So what was the system what was the one you came up with?
Started off with a game called Providence. The role-playing game that was absolute trash. Setting was beautiful, so I just wanted to homebrew everything, fix it.
Right. So for the World of Darkness, the vampire game I did, we called that a storytelling system. And I'd always argued there was the original Dungeons and Dragons and Tunnels and Trolls were the first storytelling games because you really couldn't play the games, you just could really tell stories with them. But that changed over time. Anyone else want to talk about a rule system that they changed around that got them interested in game development? Nope.
I can't remember it.
Okay, never mind.
It was a long time ago.
And I've seen them for all sorts of things. If you've ever played poker with a bunch of friends, and everyone's not just playing Texas Hold'em, they're playing various versions of stud or draw poker, you'll see the craziest versions of it suddenly come up. This is wild, that's wild. My favorite one, I have no idea if I can remember it, was a friend basically wanted to make about half the deck wild, and it was these are all the wild cards: aces, deuces, scepter queens, those are the queens with the scepter, one-eyed jacks, and suicide kings. So he basically had the king with the sword through the head. So it was very difficult to win without 4 or 5 of a kind in that version of the game. But it's just hilarious seeing all these different types. And in that case, people were willing to lose money playing with these crazy games that people just come up with off the top of their heads. Some with the most obscene names. They just come out of someone's head and suddenly people are playing them and having a great time with them. So I'm amused that these rules coming from the seat of your pants, people are willing to risk hundreds of dollars on. So keep that in mind when you're coming up with your own rules for some other game. All right. So adding mechanics is something to do carefully when you're doing game development, because these can really add to the time you take to create a game. They can knock off play balance. And Brathwaite and Schreiber do a nice little breakdown, why add mechanics. And While they list all these like publisher demand, change the marketplace, the game sucks, a sequel, the main reason you're going to want to do it is the brainstorm. We're working on Noble Armada. The mission editor sucks, but I'm saying, wow, you can do some really cool missions in here. If we made this easier, you could give it to everyone who buys the game, and they can make their own missions. That's the brainstorm. This is something that's going to add, and this is the important part for me. There's a list of criteria when you're looking at why you should add a mechanic. The number one is it will add to the player experience in a notable way. It will add to their satisfaction, to the whatever the fun factor is to it, to their ability to interact with the game. One thing we've had to do in Noble Armada is we made it kind of difficult early on. I'm used to players who like to spend a lot of time figuring out a game. We probably made it a little too difficult, so we've added a few features to make it smoother for folks to play. So one, you make the player experience better some way. Two, which ties into the mission editor again, you give more opportunity for the players to create the game they want to play. This is what's big in the free-to-play market, where you can play the game for free, but you can buy time, you can buy health packs, you can buy crazy hats for your zombies, whatever. Give players the opportunity to play the game the way they want to. With our mission editor, we're giving them the chance to make the missions that they want to go ahead and play and try out. The third one, you make the game somehow simpler, more engaging for them. Or four, and this is my personal rule, I haven't heard anyone else use, but I like, it gives the player another reason to tell a story about the game. For my games, the players are always the main marketers for it, the main evangelists spreading the word. If I put something else in the game where I know some player is going to say, let me tell you what I did in that game, I fought this kind of creature, I got to build this kind of building, I got to research this crazy technology, then it's worthwhile because they're going to want to tell people about it more and more and drive that. It increases their fun and it increases their willingness to spread the word about it. There's another one I don't usually talk about, but it's helpful if it's anything that lets you make game testing easier. And this is where your whole list of cheat codes will come in. Why add a cheat code? Because it makes testing that much easier. So that's another reason for adding mechanics to a game. You spend an hour of programming time to save a week of playtesting time on the back end is a wonderful trade-off, unless you're that coder spending the hour. All right, then we get to the question of why cut mechanics. Ratings to deliver on time or on budget because it's not really central to what you're trying to create. And that ability to ship the game really is where it comes down to. And this is where you want to pre-plan. I've unfortunately had games where they've had to launch ahead of where we thought they did. So suddenly you're left with a bunch of half-completed mechanics to the game that aren't fully tested, aren't even fully implemented, but still have to be launched. And that's problematic. So be ready to cut some things. All right. So that was a quick look at the reading itself. Any questions about what Brathwaite and Schreiber term adding and subtracting mechanics? It happens all too often. It'll happen less with the board games because you are generally not under those same constraints of shipping on time, shipping on budget. And if you need to cut corners, your corners will be cut in the quality of the physical quality of the product that you end up launching as opposed to the mechanics themselves, what goes into it. Not always true, but generally the case. All right, the next reading, which I should have had pulled up, is ostensibly on risk, which we've talked about a little bit before. But again, this is more on what you should be willing to move forward with and cut. And Brent Ellison has a nice article here, well worth reading for a number of different reasons. We're going to hit a few of the highlights along the way. And it's true. This first sentence is a good intro. It happens all the time near the end of the independent and student game development cycle. The original design gets cut down to its basic premise due to a lack of time or coding resources necessary to embellish it. The other reason for it is invariably folks who haven't worked on a number of games do have that grand vision. I know I can do AI this good. They just don't realize that in the game setting it's going to take them months to implement it the way they're thinking. So it is very difficult. Who have you worked on the game jams? I know a number of people here actually did the jams. How close was what you finally created to the original vision you had? Did any of you create more than you originally envisioned? And it's a truism. It's not just because you're college students doing a jam. If you're a 40-year-old who'd been in sophomore and making the first game, it'd be the exact same experience. You go in knowing you can do all these things well, but not realizing how long all of these take to do together. And it's just absolutely true. That's why my general rule of thumb for the game jam is figure out a game that you could do in 24 hours and do it in 48 hours. That way you've got time to make sure that everything actually works honestly, well, and effectively. So at the end of the development cycle, if you've got some hard deadline you've got to hit, you're going to realize, if you're a new game dev, you're not going to finish everything you wanted to do. So the question then comes, what do you do and how do you pull it all off in the end? And when you talk about getting the right frame of mind, don't get too attached to any single idea. Any one of them can go away. And this is even more true if you're in a situation where you do iterative game design, where every week you're coming up with a new game, keeping the good stuff, throwing out the bad stuff. Your stuff is probably going to get thrown out many times before you get to the end of the game. Coming up with and culling ideas is the cheapest part of game development, and it's one that deserves mention early to reduce your risk of not completing on time and on budget. I like this little breakdown early on. Don't depend on depth. Don't design complex controls. Don't be subtle. Make the things obvious. This is especially true for an early project, a student project. They show this death worm example where basically it's driving your worm up through the earth and hashing things up and going away again. Part of the reason why it's fun to just go ahead and do these, focus on something easy, make it happen and go on, is the truism in the industry that your first game is almost never going to be your big success. You'll be lucky if it's a success at all. The Angry Birds model, 13th or whatever game for Rovio before they have a big success. So focus on getting games made. Realize what your skill set allows for. Realize how long it takes you to do things and implement things. Realize what really is fun once you put it in case, and let them build together. And I've seen other people, Puzzled by Joe is a great example, who does all these little games and then ties them together into one big game that people are really willing to spend money for. Great example of how indie devs can do it. The joke that folks like Braid, the games like Braid, Goo, and others are really a series of different games tied together by core mechanics and art style is a relatively true one. All the levels are very distinctly different, but they have a common connection that lets you sell them together for more than you could sell one individual level for. This is something I find an interesting read. You can always plan for adding greater depth, etc., etc. Your first thought should be, how can I make this as impressive as possible? It's an interesting idea, and I like the idea you really want to focus it. Focus on a few things that you can make really cool. And again, focusing on some things really cool as opposed to everything is a big difference. The difference between making a game that's big and fun as opposed to gold-plated and collapses under its own weight. And I like this kind of breakdown of things that are 90% of the time going to be a lot of fun. Swarms of enemies. I can't think of any game where I didn't enjoy somehow dealing with swarms of enemies or I'm some sort of superhero. There's the more recent versions of Dungeons and Dragons have implemented this. They put in all these very weak mooks that you can just mow down. You see this in movies all the time. The hero goes up against a whole bunch of weaker forces and you wipe them out and then finally get onto the big boss before they're pulled down. The whole idea of superpowers. I remember a game designer friend of mine in the 90s, there was a stage when board games just kept getting into bigger and bigger units. Steve Jackson released Ogre back in the 70s, and we just had all these, we're fighting these giant mechs, everything's getting bigger and bigger, and so he started joking about he's going to make the game Behemoth, where you're these spaceships powered by small solar systems, hurtling through the universe, throwing suns at one another. And he was joking, but a few of us started thinking, hey, wait a minute, that'd actually be kind of fun to design. So, yeah, but he's true. Bigger, more ostentatious, crazier is often a whole lot of fun. And we see this, I love the idea of Sonic. This is the fastest thing out there. Doesn't look like a big, over-the-top game, but he is Sonic. And people love it accordingly, something big and over the top. Arcade style progression. No middle or end required. Just keep playing until you're sick of it and go on. This is the one I love that he added in here. Player creativity. This is definitely true for the folks who play my games. They want to feel that they are creating something. They want to feel that they can give their ship a name, their captain a name, whatever. This is something that they can put ownership into, that they have an investment in. And I think it's true of many different players, of all different types. They want to feel that they are creating something along the way, that they're not just having a brief, fleeting experience, but they are actually being part of the creative process. And finally, having some sort of fun theme. How many of you have played games at AdultSwim.com? This is a local company, so I would like folks to support it, even though the games are made from everywhere. Their focus is A, good gameplay, but B, some interesting thematic element for the game. They have a fun fighting game. One of their very first successful games on their website was Bible Fight. You would play Eve fighting Moses or the like. And she would throw her apple and he would part the seas or whatever. They had a special movie, Street Fighter, done with a biblical theme. Attracted all sorts of eyes to the Adult Swim site. Another one they did early on was something like 7 minutes to kill yourself. In 7 minutes, you had to go to a corporate meeting. So, better to kill yourself than to go to yet another corporate meeting. The game was fun, but the theme was what really attracted people. And the funniest thing, folks at Adult Swim told me this shortly after it came out. They would always hear from these people at work playing that game before they had to go to a meeting. So it just really fit appropriately along. And they talk about violence as a classic visceral theme. Obviously, for something like Bible Fight, it's in there. But the 7 Ways to Kill Yourself is a different form of violence. How many games have self-inflicted violence at the core and do it well? And they did. So, a lot of different elements in here that are worth reading. I like that little cheat sheet right here. All right, what can I do to spice up the game? A whole bunch of enemies. Just throwing a whole bunch of things for the player to mow down and feel godlike about. Let's throw in something else for the players to create. That's a nice little checklist for you to enjoy when necessary. And if you haven't already, check out AdultSwim.com because you'll see all sorts of good ideas for games in there. All right, we are at 7:20. We've been here a little over an hour. Go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we will go over Play with Fire at 7:30.